Miles Marshall Lewis is a cultural critic, journalist, and author of several books, the most recent being Promise That You Will Sing About Me, The Power and Poetry of Kendrick Lamar. A former editor at XXL and Vibe magazines, his articles have appeared in GQ, Essence, Rolling Stone, and the New York Times. We recently spent time discussing his path to journalism, leaving New York City to live in Paris for several years, and his unexpected interview with Prince, which led to an Ebony magazine cover story in 2015. Because Miles and I are close in age, our talk began with the subject that's close to both of our hearts, hip-hop, which is a good thing, because as of August 5th, 2024, Miles became the cultural historian for the Hip Hop Museum in the Bronx, New York, opening in 2025. Hope you enjoy. We've been classified as the hip-hop generation.
Yeah.
Is that something that you agree with, or is that more of a term that that trivializes what hip hop really is, being that it's more than just
Yeah.
the musical aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what would trivialize it is if it were called like the rap generation, for example, because hip hop encompasses different facets, right? It's rap, but it's also the breakdancing, and it's also the DJing, and it's also the graffiti, and it's like all the elements, right? But not just the elements, but it's something that connotes like the time period that you came of age, right? Because hip hop didn't exist in the world really before
Right.
we grew up on it. So no, I don't think that the term hip hop generation trivializes us as a generation. To call us that, I kind of prefer that to Generation X, for example. Which is the other term, right?
Yeah.
But I realize that not everyone had the same experience or relationship to hip hop that we did. I guess there are people out there who don't like hip hop, or
Sure.
rap music in general didn't mean as much to them, or maybe they had already come of age by the time they really glommed onto it. I mean, for me, growing up in the Bronx, definitely, I was exposed to hip hop before Rapper's Delight was even released. It's like, okay, I grew up in an area in the Northeast Bronx called Co-op City. Co-op City is sort of suburban-ish almost, like it was multicultural, and
Okay.
there were no street gangs. And it was actually very close to Mount Vernon, which is where Diddy grew up, and like Heavy D grew up
Heavy
and
D.
stuff.
Yeah.
And so that was Co-op City. I had a grandmother who lived on Baychester, in the Baychester area, which is also like the Northeast Bronx. So these are not rough and tumble areas, really. Things happen. Definitely, there are people that I went to high school with who are no longer with us or in jail, right? But in the South Bronx, my great grandparents lived in the South Bronx. I had a grandmother who lived on Findlay Avenue, and a great grandparents who lived on St. Anne's Avenue, and that was the South Bronx. Whenever we would go there, which was several times a month actually, and Thanksgivings and birthdays and Christmases and all of that, I was in, I guess, have you seen The Get Down on Netflix?
I have.
Yeah, like that was the Get Down environment. Like literally,
Okay.
I think there was a scene that was filmed on a rock in St. Mary's Park that I used to play on when I was a kid with my
Okay.
Micronauts and my like Mego, superhero action figures.
Man, Micronauts. But yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But yes.
So that's where I was when I first got exposed to hip hop. Really, my earliest hip hop memory is probably being at my grandmother's house on Caldwell Avenue, right across the street from St. Mary's Park, and the music being like the music from the park being super deafening, and I have an uncle who's only 6 years older than I am, and my grandma was kind of like, take Miles outside, and so he took me, and his friends were there anyway in the park, and it was cool DJ AJ, who ended up being immortalized in a Curtis Blow song called AJ Scratch, right? Because
Yeah.
for a while he was AJ, I want to
Mm-hmm.
see you.
Mm-hmm.
He was Curtis Blow's DJ, and he was out there DJing, right? So as a kid, I don't have recollections of seeing like Grandmaster Flash out there doing whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
AJ, it was like, oh wow, like he's the source of this loud music, and there were people battling in terms of like breakdancing and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
b-boying, and yeah, and then Rappers Delight came out. I remember the first day I heard it, the same uncle took me to his friend's house, and the friend, when we walked in, maybe he was a teenager or whatever, he was playing the soundtrack to Saturday Night Fever because I was still kind of in the air and the ether,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
then he took it off and slapped on the Sugar Hill Gang, and it surprised me that my uncle like knew the lyrics already, or that you could even memorize the lyrics to what they were saying. That was pretty, amazing to me. And it just went from there. So it was like I was, exposed to all these elements, certainly visiting the South Bronx, seeing graffiti everywhere. And, I wasn't on the trains much. My parents had
Mm-hmm.
a car, but
Mm-hmm.
I remember, an early trip to Coney Island with my cousins, and we took the train out there, and it was plastered with all kind of, with all kind of tags and stuff, very colorful and dangerous looking, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a big deal. I mean, in conjunction with disco and the different things that were going on in the 1970s, but definitely, hip hop was there, and this was just the world that we were born into, right? Or the world I was born into. I didn't
Yeah.
know that the entire United States was not like this.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
park jams weren't happening everywhere. I presume that this is just how things were. It
Do you
yeah,
ever feel a certain superiority because you grew up where you grew up, how you grew up? There's a certain maybe authenticity
yeah,
to your relationship to the music than even I would.
definitely. I felt a little bit of
Uh-huh.
that. Sure. I went to college in Atlanta, Georgia,
Yeah.
and when I arrived, I guess it was my first sense of how important New York seemed to be to other sections of the country. And
Mm-hmm.
and so,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
at that point, sure, you start to feel yourself a little bit like, yeah, I am from New York actually, and this is real hip hop,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not. And feeling, yeah, in terms of superiority, that is the perfect word. Because I was not a fan early on of like West Coast hip hop. It was very
Okay.
hip hop was regional. I went to college. I started college in 1988, and so
Mm-hmm.
this was the year that people were starting to come. Let's say Two Live Crew and Ice T and NWA, and these other areas were sort of staking their claim, and I was definitely big on schooling people from these sections of the country. That's not he can't rhyme. That's not really
Uh-huh.
like what you need to do is listen to Public Enemy and
Uh-huh.
Rakim and
Mm-hmm.
these people who are trying to say positive things and flip wordplay in a different way. Like
Yeah.
Eazy-E and Rakim are not the same thing, and um, but I came around. I came around, and like I relatively early on, right? It was the '90s, and it was clear to me pretty early on that it was better for the culture, period. That uh, that every section could use hip hop to express their circumstances and where they were coming from in their own neighborhoods and what they were dealing with, and uh, and I learned a lot from Ice Cube and company.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, sure.
Mm-hmm. Were you writing by this time?
Yes. So my first published work was in the pages of Captain America. I
Huh.
wrote them a fan letter when I was
Uh-huh.
11, and the way it used to work is you buy a comic, and like there's a letters page at the last page of the comic, the letters page, and kids or readers are writing into the to the editor, explaining what they liked about the story, blah blah blah. And so I did that, and it wasn't even my first letter. It might have been my second, but I had tried to make the letters page of whatever magazine or whatever comic. They didn't publish it. Anyway, Captain America came out. I saw my name in lights. I brought it to school and showed it to everybody, and I was like very excited, and that was Marvel Comics, right? So they published 2 more letters of mine as a kid. So that was pretty cool. So I was writing. Not only that, I started journaling in high school. I still journal. I wrote my journal last night, right? It's not an everyday thing, obviously, but I've been journaling since 1986. So it was an English class assignment, and then I just never stopped doing it. And so inadvertently, I kind of put in my 10,000 hours writing to myself. And definitely there's loads of information in those early journals about Prince and what I was reading about what was happening with Paisley Park. And, I was already in high school reading Billboard magazine and definitely Rolling Stone and Spin and stuff like that. So
where was the pivot point to you wanting to actually have a career at this, or that you saw, oh, wait a minute, here's an opportunity that I could actually, do something deliberately to be in a page of a magazine?
Right. I want to say that was probably when Vibe magazine started. I remember I was at Morehouse College and I was majoring in sociology, and it was my senior year, and I took 5 years to get out of college, so technically I should have been out already. And I remember an MTV News report talking about Vibe magazine, and then maybe the next day in sociology class, the teacher brought it to class, and I had already looked for it on newsstands in Atlanta, and I didn't see it. Maybe it was out in New York already because they were based in New York. And she brought it to class and, passed it around, and, there was general interest. But I was like, oh my God, yo, word, like finally, like, somebody's treating hip hop like Rolling Stone treats rock music. Like, this is the dream job. Like, if there were more than 5 people on staff, I would love to be number 6, or, like, I don't know how many hip hop journalists they're going to allow in the world, but, that would be what I would do with my life. If I had my druthers, right? The cover, it was the test issue, supposedly, right?
Tretch was on the cover? The Tretch issue?
Yeah.
The Tretch cover, yeah.
And that was by Kevin Powell, who I was already familiar with because he was on The Real World, and The Real World had aired already.
With Heather B.
Yeah, indeed. And I was a fan of that show. I mean, that was the first reality TV show, right? And he was a black man on the show, and he wasn't that much older than me. And he was going around saying that he was a writer, and that was attractive to me because by that point I had been writing for the school newspaper. It was the death of Miles Davis in '91 that prompted me to start writing for the school newspaper. I was named after him, and I had seen him live twice before he passed at Avery Fisher Hall, something they used to call the JBC Jazz Festival.
Sure, yeah.
And so I wrote something unsolicited about him and his legacy, and I just Monday came to campus and handed it into the school newspaper, and they didn't have anything yet. Maybe they weren't even going to do anything, so they ran it, and that was the beginning of that. I was like, wow, they do have this, this school newspaper. I could just sort of, in the arts and entertainment section, I could just get my Spin magazine on, or my Rolling Stone, like I could.
Yeah, okay.
So I did start to review Eric B. and Rakim, and Madonna had this sex book that she came out with, the photographs by Stephen Meisel. I did a review of that, and I wrote something about Eddie Murphy and like the Malcolm X movie and stuff like that. So that was fun. But I mean, when Vibe came out, I was like, wow. I called them, and I was like, can I intern there, or I'm about to graduate, can I get a job there? Like, how does this work? Whatever. So Kevin Powell came to Georgia. He, I think, maybe spoke at Georgia Tech or Georgia State or someplace, and I went and I gave him clips, and he was like, oh, thanks, whatever. And maybe the day after graduation, he called me, and I was like, oh wow, word, I finally read your clips. You coming to New York? You staying in Atlanta? I was like, nah, I'm coming home next week. So he was like, come out of office, and I interned. the summer of '93, and I got to see how magazines work. And
Mm-hmm.
Quincy Jones, he was a founder of Vibe magazine. He came by the office one day, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there were news cameras, and I was like, yeah, this is a cool job. I got to work with Kevin. My job, I guess, as an intern was to work with Kevin Powell, Scott Polson Bryant,
Mm-hmm.
and Joan Morgan,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Joan Morgan
Mm-hmm.
is the
Mm-hmm.
mother of hip hop feminism, and Scott Polson Bryant I had already known from writing a cover story about Prince in Spin magazine when before Diamonds and Pearls came out. So it was like this is cool. This is yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then 6 years later, they made me the music editor of Vibe. But between that point and interning there, I was paying my dues at a bunch of different places. But yeah, the first point where I felt like I could really do this, as a profession was when I saw Vibe. I think.
I mean, for black music, you kind of had two outlets, technically three, but it was like Right On Magazine, Black Beat, and Rock and Soul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And then beyond that, there was Nelson George's columns in Billboard magazine.
very true.
And if you were, you know, up on it, you had Greg Tate and the Village Voice. But
Right. And Nelson was there
you know,
too.
okay.
Mhm.
Um, but 19 on the West Coast, I wasn't really hip to Village Voice in that way.
Yeah, yeah.
But there was no middle. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It was either you know teen oriented magazines, which have their own significance and importance,
Hmm.
or you had you know one black journalist who was fighting to get heard or read, you
Hmm.
know,
Definitely,
in this
definitely,
institutionalized what magazine.
definitely.
And so, yeah, man, when Vibe came out, that was that was a breakthrough because it was our music, our current music presented in a very serious editorial way.
It also looked
Um,
beautiful.
and it looked so good. The photography was top notch. The
Yeah,
spreads,
right. The
there was a
covers. Yeah.
real sophistication
Hmm.
to it, and I think it forced you to take the music seriously just because of the presentation before you even read the words.
Yeah, it's true. I
Um,
mean, like, the Source magazine predated Vibe, and
right.
people knew I was a magazine head in college, and a few of them tried to show me the Source, so it put me onto it, and um, and I was kind of snobbish toward it. I didn't give the
Mm-hmm.
Source a chance, because I didn't like the presentation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I shouldn't have been that way in retrospect. I mean, I ended up writing my own Source cover stories eventually, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I felt
Mm-hmm.
like at the time, I wanted it to look like Vibe, or Vibe didn't exist. I wanted it to look like Rolling Stone. Like it seemed
Mm-hmm.
like the Source was sort of just one step up from like Word Up magazine or something.
Yeah.
And I was wrong about that. Again, I wasn't buying it. I wasn't reading the articles. There was already cool work being done by like Dream Hampton and Bones
Mm-hmm.
Malone and Kierna Mayo, and I just wasn't reading it. And when Vibe came out, then I started reading, the both of them sort of simultaneously and seeing that good work was being done at both places, and eventually a new editor in chief took over the Source, and they were really sort of neck and neck competitors, and sort of covering the whole breadth of hip hop culture
Mm-hmm.
in a way that had never been seen.
Also rap pages, but to
Hmm.
kind
Yeah,
of kind of like a lesser
definitely.
degree.
Yeah, no,
Um,
definitely. Rap Pages was up in there. I wrote for them as well, and there was great work being done there under editor in chief Sheena Lester, who ended up moving from the West Coast to the East Coast and heading up Double XL magazine once that debuted,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and being my boss for a while because I guess that was my first big gig. Um, I had started, let's say, what was I doing? I was in law school, right?
Wait,
Um,
you're in law school?
so this is what happened. After Morehouse, right? I discovered Vibe my senior year, blah blah blah. But
Yeah.
I was also studying for the LSAT.
Mm-hmm.
I envisioned that what my job would be is I'd be an entertainment lawyer. I'd be like Londell McMillan, right?
All right.
Um,
Yeah.
well, I didn't become a lawyer, obviously. When I was done with law school, I got a job at Black Beat magazine. That was my first job. I was an assistant.
Okay.
I was an
Uh-huh.
assistant editor at Black Beat magazine. Maybe I started that in '96, and then they invented Double XL, and that created more jobs for people. Like
Yeah. Okay.
in the
Okay.
beginning, it was like if you couldn't get hired at Vibe or the Source, then there wasn't a job for you unless you were going to move to the West Coast for rap pages, right? And
Yeah.
so anyway, they invented Double XL. It was also based in New York, and that was my first big gig. I was the deputy editor at Double XL for like a year, and then Vibe finally, came back to me like, "You used to intern here, right? Like you're one of
Mm-hmm.
us. We'll
Mm-hmm.
pay you twice as
Mm-hmm.
much. Like come be the
Mm-hmm.
music editor." And so that's what I did, and then the .com thing kind of happened, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a mass exodus from the magazines to websites, and I got a job at BET.com, and you know, on and on. But like my first gigs in the industry in the '90s were from Black Beat to Double XL to Vibe, and kind of capped off with BET.
Did you find that you were in demand given the quality of your work?
Yeah, I
Did
mean,
you did you find yourself in
I
those
think
situations?
it was a little bit of both. I think I was hot for a while.
Uh-huh.
It's hard to tell when you're inside of it.
Sure, 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 sure.
No, but I will say that my first cover story was about the breakup of A Tribe Called Quest, right? And so this is
Mm-hmm.
before social medias, and so nobody knew that the group had broken up until they saw the source on the newsstands and they read my interview with the Tribe Called
Mm-hmm.
Quest explaining why
Mm-hmm.
they broke up. So it hit the stands, and Funkmaster Flex was on High 97, like Tribe broke up. In the source, there's this, Q-Tip tells
Mm-hmm.
the source, blah blah blah,
Mm-hmm.
and that so everybody who wanted to know why they broke up, which was a lot of people because the Tribe Called
Yeah.
Quest was a big deal,
Yeah.
they could only really know from the source. It was like Kurt Loder on MTV News, like Tribe Called Quest breaks up, and it's like it's the source, right, in
Mm-hmm.
the picture or whatever. So that's my story. Um, that comes out right when I'm in talks with Double XL to work there. So they're like, oh yeah, like in terms of the interview process, whoever was up against me, um, they chose me, right?
Yeah.
Um, my next cover was at this point sort of a famous photo Gordon Parks took of hip hop luminaries on
Yeah, like the the
126th
the,
Street.
the great day or the greatest day.
Yeah,
The sort of almost a reenactment, if you
yes,
will.
yes,
And you
indeed.
got like what 200 rappers and DJs and producers on
Right. There were
that.
people we couldn't even identify who were in that photo,
Uh-huh.
right? But I wrote the essay for that photo when it came out, or that issue when it came out. It was a recreation of Esquire magazine doing the same thing back in the day with jazz
Mm-hmm.
figures, right? Thelonious
Mm-hmm.
Monk, different people, and so that was the magazine Esquire doing this thing, jazz players or whatever. So Double XL, a hip hop magazine, recreated it with rappers and just
Mm-hmm.
DJs and the hip hop community, right? So I was out there. It was a great day, literally,
Yeah.
and I wrote the essay. And so, on the heels of the Tribe Called Quest thing coming out, then bam, the next month comes.
Mm-hmm.
Magazines are monthly, and it's a great day in Harlem, and everybody wants to fold out the cover 3 times to see
Yep.
Gordon Parks's photograph and read about it. And so that's my story also. And so because of those two stories and other things that I've done since, I guess I was forming a reputation. I guess I had one already, but those were my two earliest covers, and they were sort of big deals.
How important is credibility? as a writer?
I think it's very important. There's a writer who I won't name, who was like from the suburbs in Massachusetts, and was doing a lot of writing and was very popular. And but there were people who felt that his writing wasn't credible because he didn't live this. He's not from here. He's a carpetbagger. uh, but that goes to how important hip hop was. That even you could be from the suburbs of Boston and still like the native tongues, De La Soul and all those people meant as much to you as somebody who grew up in the Bronx, and knew hip hop before Rapper Select came out. It was that pervasive to our generation that being from one place didn't necessarily make you more credible than being from another place or living, a different experience.
I mean, I asked you that question because you're writing about rappers who they're not used to being criticized.
Sure.
And if you don't, I would think that if you don't have, because credibility is kind of, it's subjective, right?
Right.
So it's like if they don't feel that you are credible enough to even speak on an opinion of my work, then it doesn't matter if those opinions are fair. It really just gets into how I feel about you as a person, and the only way that I can know about you as a person if I've just met you is to find out the other things that you have done.
Sure. There is such a thing as code switching.
Okay.
When I was in a trailer on a video shoot with like Method Man and Redman, and they're passing a blunt around, I don't have like my Morehouse College hat on, I have my my Bronx hat on, you know what I mean? And but being from the Bronx, like that was also I would like to think authentically
that's a layer of authenticity, I would imagine.
Sure. You know what I mean? And so you know how to act. I mean, you gotta know how to gotta know how to play it,
Yeah. So let me ask this. I mean, still on the credibility thing. I'm thinking about your bylines and who you've talked to. At the time that you had interviewed Prince, I wonder how much your credibility went into play for Prince to even say, yeah, okay.
With the Prince interview, what happened was that we didn't. I worked at Ebony at the time, and we didn't ask for a Prince interview. Actually, what happened was that Paisley Park contacted the office and asked for me, and they didn't frame it in such a way that Prince wants to talk to him.
This is what you're gonna do. Okay.
It was more that the opportunity exists for him to interview Joshua Welton because he's producing whatever the album was, right? Artificial Age.
Yeah,
right?
Artificial, yeah.
And so, sure, like as far as I was concerned, say no to Paisley Park, so I'll be on the next plane, right? And I went and I talked to Joshua for 10 minutes, and then Prince came in and we spoke for hours. It was never sort of like, Prince, can we interview you? And then, oh yes, Miles has authenticity. Sure, why not? It was more, random than that. Furthermore, though, during the course of my interview with Prince, he mentioned something that I had written for Wax Poetics magazine about Madhouse, right? Madhouse, as we all know, is Prince's sort of offshoot jazz band project from like the mid 80s that he did. He played all the instruments except the saxophone, which was handled by Eric Leeds. Saxophone and flute were handled by Eric Leeds, right? So Wax Poetics was going to do a special Prince issue. I didn't, it wasn't even sort of decided that that's what was happening. But I
Yeah.
pitched to Wax Poetics. The magazine was known for deep dives into kind of obscure stuff. At some point, I pitched to them a big Madhouse story. And, Madhouse was not the most popular thing going, right? Like,
Right.
Madhouse was
Yeah.
almost sort of like a code word to separate the real Prince fans
Yeah.
from
If you
the
know,
casual.
you know, and if you
Right.
know, then
Yeah.
let's have this conversation.
Right, exactly. So I always liked them. They only had 2 albums that were officially released, right? And so I pitched them sort of a Vanity Fair level, like expose sort of piece, like let's do Madhouse, but let's do 5,000 words on Madhouse. And they were like, fine, do what you want, whatever. So I say all that to say that when I interviewed Prince, he brought it up, and that let me know that he had been exposed to what I wrote about Madhouse, and that's why I was on his radar for them to contact Ebony and say, yeah, get this guy here.
I had always wondered with Prince where he shunned tape recorders.
Right.
My understanding is that you could barely take notes in front of him.
Right.
And I've always marveled, and I guess I got to ask you, since I have the opportunity, how do you, you just remember all of that stuff?
Yeah. So I cheated. I guess I don't know if you're aware of this or not. I cheated. I'll tell you the story though. I recorded Prince. I cheated. But part of it was me thinking that, well, maybe this is an unspoken thing. That because I don't understand how people were how writers were remembering all of this either. Maybe it's something that, like, don't ask, don't tell or something. Like when I arrived at Paisley, nobody took away my phone or nobody, of course I didn't have, a digital recorder in the States or anything. But this is the story. We spoke maybe for over an hour. I asked Prince for a piano. We're in Paisley Park, so naturally there are pianos everywhere, right? So he says to me, like, oh, you're going to play us a little ditty? And he kind of, laughs under his breath. And I know Prince songs, right? I don't know them like Lisa Coleman, but I can play some Prince songs, right? And I brought up the piano during sort of a lull in the conversation because I was like, well, I want to keep this going, but I wasn't prepared to interview him in the first place, so I was just sort of flying off the cuff, right? So anyway, I pull out my phone, and I press the voice memo thing, and I record myself playing Prince on Prince's piano, because when do you get to do that, right? So it finishes. I finish recording whenever it was the cross. I put the phone back in my pocket. It is still recording. It's in my inside pocket. I have a suit on. It's in my breast pocket. I go back in the control room and I ask his assistant to, if Prince has more time. So Prince has more time. He comes back and we speak for another, couple hours or whatever. So meanwhile, the voice memo is still recording from when I had recorded myself on piano. So it's barely muffled, really.
Yeah.
So then I go back to New York and I just basically I transcribe it all because I have his exact words. And it comes out and, Prince.org people are like, Prince would never have said that, like Prince at all. I'm like, that's funny because we haven't heard what Prince has actually said for the past 20 years, unless he's been on Arsenio Hall or, Tabitha Smiley or like video recorded. And so I felt a little bad about it. I was conflicted because it's like, okay, I'm supposed to be interviewing you. Generally, the rules of an interview are that you record the person. You want to get what they actually said. You don't want to paraphrase the person. You would think that the person being interviewed would want to be accurately represented. Those are ordinarily the ground rules. Um, I know how Prince operates, and so I know that he doesn't want to be recorded. But nobody says to me when I arrive, "Don't record him." Nobody confiscates anything or,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
weighs me down like an airport to make sure that I'm
Mm-hmm.
not,
Uh-huh.
So,
Uh-huh.
um, and he said what he said, like was I supposed to feel? And then he passed away, and it was like,
Oh,
wow,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
actually glad that I have his, some of his last words, and for
Mm-hmm.
sure,
Mm-hmm.
when the article came out, it got a lot of praise, yeah, like it seemed to reach people, in on a level that like other interviews that he had been giving in the 21st century,
Mm-hmm.
didn't really hit the same, probably because they were paraphrased by writers trying to remember, you know, bits of information that he told them, and hopefully some of it was my love for Prince and posing the questions that I posed, um, but yeah, in the end, I felt better that the words were there, uh, for true posterity.
I absolutely want to talk to you about um, your published works, your books, but I really want to know about Paris. I want to know about France,
Cool.
and I want to know was this an exodus? Because it seemed pretty purposeful, given that you
I
lived there
mean,
for 3 years.
7.
Okay.
I want to say that I left when I was 33, right? And
Hmm.
I was kind of idealistic at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I had a romantic vision of Paris, right, from my literary heroes, particularly James Baldwin and Richard Wright.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I did sort of see it at the time as an exodus. And, in retrospect, being older now, I just sort of feel like I was more naive, than anything. And so, yeah, there was a lot of talk in the media about weapons of mass destruction, and
Mm-hmm.
there were worldwide protests against then President Bush going through with this war that actually was unrelated to 9/11. He just went to war for other
Mm-hmm.
reasons, right? And so at the time, like I said, idealistic, I kind of felt like, well, I don't want my tax dollars going to like the bullets and bombs that are going to rain down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I want to sort of disconnect myself from that karma and leave, and I can leave. At the time, my first book, which is right behind me, right? My first
Yeah.
book was about to come out, and so I had handed it in, and they gave me, the way it works is that when you get a book deal, they pay you half the money right away, and when you hand
Mm-hmm.
it in, you get the rest of the money. So I got the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the money. I like
Mm-hmm.
sold my comic books. I had a big collection of comics, and
Mm.
I set
Mm.
aside like my 100 favorite ones and was like, I'll never open the rest of these. Like, it'd be
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
nice to give them to my kids maybe or something, but I'm just gonna sell them. And so I sold them, and I had a little nest egg, and I went, right. I had a French ex girlfriend, um, who I contacted and was like, can you help me figure out how to really live there, who is my wife now. We ended up
It's
getting back
wonderful.
together and falling in love,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
getting married, having kids, right? Um, but yeah, I definitely did feel like I'm out of here. Like I've had it with this
Mm-hmm.
place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been to Paris before once, and just immediately fell in love with the place. I mean, the architecture, the food, that just the atmosphere. Like I
Mm-hmm.
got it, right away.
Mm-hmm.
So I went, and I stayed for 7 years, and so I lived out the rest of my 30s like that, and um, and it was a great time. I learned French eventually, and my two
Mm-hmm.
kids were born there. I got married over there, and I still go, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
My wife's family is amazing, like her parents, her dad, and her brother and cousins and stuff, her friends. They're all still there, and you know, we all still go. I don't regret it at all.
What brought you back?
Uh, Part of it was Obama.
Huh.
I
Okay.
voted for
Mm-hmm.
him abroad, uh, and felt like, wow, like we finally got a black president. Am I gonna miss that whole thing? Like not even living in
Uh-huh.
America? Like, what is it?
Uh-huh.
What is that like? Like there's a black man in charge. I kind of wanted my kids to be a little more Americanized. I think that maybe it was bothering me on a certain level that they knew English, but they weren't really speaking it. And
Mm.
and they knew my parents, but they didn't really know them because it was like
Yeah.
once a year that we were visiting for Christmas or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it was financial. I found my share of jobs over there, and I was
Mm-hmm.
still writing books from over there. But
Did you work on the Sly book, the 33 and a third?
yeah, I wrote that while I was over there. And but the thing is, I was losing money because of the exchange rate. So whatever I would be paid
Ah.
in dollars, it would be
Uh-huh.
like almost cut in half by the time I got the
Mm.
euros to
Mm-hmm.
withdraw at the ATM in Paris or whatever. And I got tired of that, and I had like 2 gigs while I was over there. And they pay a lot less over there. I mean, it
Mm.
like you have to leave to understand what America is, right? So the
Right.
fact that this
Right.
is the richest country in the world means certain things, among them that like salaries are bigger here.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
even like on the freelance tip, I was writing for French Rolling Stone, but their rate was nothing like America's rate.
Hmm.
It wasn't even worth doing.
Mm. Huh.
And set in terms of salaries, like yeah, I was in my 30s making like, I don't know, 20 something $1,000 a year, like that wasn't cool, when Vibe was paying me whatever, like
Yeah.
like a 6-figure job in Paris is harder to come by than it is, in the States. So
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, yeah, it makes more sense to be here. And then we came back, and immediately I started working at Ebony, and just kind of
Mm-hmm.
fell back into uh, the type of gigs that I was like used to or whatever.
Promise that you will sing about me. Your
Hey,
book on Kendrick Lamar.
yes,
Was
indeed.
that your idea? You wrote a proposal
Let
and
me think
pitched it?
about that. No, no, it was not. I switched agents around that time. At that time,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to write a Prince book.
Ah.
He hadn't even passed away yet, and I wanted to write a book about Paisley Park Records. And
Mm-hmm.
so at the time, I was going around interviewing Jill Jones and Taja Sidell, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
who else did I meet up with? I met up with David Z because of his involvement
Mm-hmm.
with the Maserati album. I met Brown Mark, uh, George Clinton,
Mm-hmm.
definitely, Mavis Staples, definitely. I was piecing together that, right, and I came up with a great, I thought, like 100-page proposal. I know that Paisley Park didn't set the world on fire like Motown, but there's a story there, like
Yeah.
even just those years in Prince's career would be sort of highlighted and whatever. So I wanted to do this book. Um, and, my agent read it, and, we were going back and forth on it. And I put together, the most elaborate proposal I could. And she was like, no, I don't really, I
Hmm.
can't sell this, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
but it's niche,
Mm-hmm.
outside of the fan base
Mm-hmm.
of Prince. And I don't know how
Mm-hmm.
many of them are readers. Um,
Mm-hmm.
People aren't going to buy this. So I decided maybe I needed a new agent. So I
Mm-hmm.
switched agents, right? And when I switched agents, immediately they were like, they were kind of more tied in, maybe, or they were just better for me. I signed with them, and weeks later they were like, "Do you want to do a Kendrick Lamar book? You've interviewed him, and how do you feel
Mm-hmm.
about him?" And I was like, "Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
would, I would do a Kendrick book." He had just won the Pulitzer Prize, and St. Martin's Press wanted a book on him, and the editors there were, in touch with my agents, and they were like, "Yeah, well, we represent Miles Marshall Lewis, and then I had a book deal. I switched agents, and like in a month, I had a book deal.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote that, and then for the same publisher, I'm doing the Dave Chappelle book, but Kendrick, I felt like I don't listen to as much hip hop as I used to. And in terms of modern day hip hop, Kendrick is definitely someone that I was actually listening to, that I did actually have opinions about. I'd interviewed him for a cover story in Ebony magazine in like 2015, I think,
Okay.
and had gone out to Cali, to talk to him in the studio and stuff. And I had a lot of interview footage that I didn't use. It's like for a cover story, you quote the person 6 times, 5 times, and then the other hours that you spoke just end up on your computer or whatever. So, so I use a lot of those, for the book, and it did well.
Yeah, I had wondered if you had written the proposal for it because
I did have to, but I mean,
I mean, like it was your idea, like
it was
like
not.
what you described for Paisley Park, that you actually did that
Right.
with the idea, and really exclusively because, reading it, you interweave your story with Kendrick's story and find parallels in some ways, but in each way directly relating to hip hop.
The first rap album I bought was UTFO because Roxanne was big.
Okay.
And I was like, oh wow, there's a whole album. Like, okay, I'll give him a chance. Like, UTFO is going to be big. And and so maybe the second one I ever bought was LL Cool J's Radio. And in Radio there are liner notes by Nelson George, and that was probably the first time I'd ever read Nelson's work. And I know that in 8th grade, he had a biography of Michael Jackson that was out that I think still to this day it's like his best-selling book. And people were reading it, like kids, 13-year-olds were reading it during Thriller Mania and stuff, anything Michael related, which is why it's Nelson's biggest selling book, right? Still. I say that to say that, like, that was my first exposure to Nelson. My dad was a big magazine reader, and he would read The Village Voice, before me, right? But like when I was a kid, it would be underneath his arm or whatever when he would come home from work or whatever. So that's where I discovered Greg Tate, and I bring him up to say that, like, his style could be like that in terms of like bringing some personal elements into the greater narrative of what he was trying to explain. But when you can do it, the way it's supposed to be done, I think it's an effective sort of thing. And over the years, I think that to the degree that anyone has really kind of followed my writing all this time, it's sort of an expected style of mine, I think. And so, hopefully it works.
do you feel you found your voice?
Yeah, I'd say that. That's a good question. But yeah, I would say that. I know that there are writers who go through like their first draft and their second draft and their third draft. I know that Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me, which is an excellent book. I think what we've read as that book is like his 6th draft. But I constantly refine my writing as I'm writing it. Like, so I don't just sort of vomit it all out and then go back and do a draft 2. What I do is I write and then I go back to it the next day to add more, but I reread what I wrote and I make changes, and while I'm in the process of doing that, if something sounds too like bland or doesn't really, if I can inject more personality, let's say, into it, or write it or choose different language in terms of making it more like my voice, then that's when that kind of happens, so that by the time it's all over, it sounds like I wrote it, because of my aesthetic.
The Chappelle book, do you have a deadline that you're going to hit soon for the
hopefully? I've pushed this deadline a few times, and I'm gonna push it at least one more time.
Is he participating?
No. As opposed to the Kendrick book where I interviewed him for Ebony, and I had interview footage. I haven't spoken to David at all. No. Yeah.
Does that make it harder? Well, harder is also relative, but I mean,
Yeah,
like,
I mean, a little. I think I struggled with this book more than the Kendrick book, and I'm not sure exactly why that is. Maybe it's because he's made it more difficult, to celebrate him. And maybe it's because it's I guess I write about Black culture in general, but mainly about like music and film. But the world of Black comedy, I wanted to do it justice, and so that involved a certain amount of research. I didn't want, I didn't want to not understand any aspect of it, and you can get lost in research, But certainly, I read biographies of like Red Fox and Flip Wilson, and was watching movies about Moms Mabley, and learning about stuff that I didn't really know about, and eventually you have to sort of like, okay, I think I know the world well enough to know what Chappelle's place in it is, and so that's where I am now. Richard Pryor, naturally, Paul Mooney, I want to definitely place him where he belongs in that pantheon, and you cannot, if you don't know the pantheon, more than just like
I heard the record or I saw the movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's taken longer. It will probably be out in 2025 at the rate I'm going,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was fun.
This has been Entry Points. You can find us online at entrypoints.com. That's entrypts.com. And find us anywhere and everywhere fine RSS feeds are consumed. See you next show.